Wichita, Kansas. The year is 1974. At the time, Wichita was known as the air capital of the world, a bustling hub built on the aerospace industry. It was a city where people knew their neighbors. Children rode their bikes until the streetlights came on, and front doors were often left unlocked. It was a place of deep-rooted community trust, but in the bitter cold of January, that illusion of safety was about to be violently torn apart. A dark shadow was creeping over the city, one that would completely paralyze the state of Kansas for the next 3 decades. This is the story of a man who hid behind a mask of absolute normality. A church president, a Boy Scout leader, a loving husband and father. But beneath that suburban camouflage, he harbored a profound, monstrous darkness. It began on the morning of January 15th, 1974. The Otero family lived in a modest, single-story house on Edgemoor Street. Joseph Otero, a 38-year-old Air Force veteran, and his wife Julie were getting ready for the day. They had 5 children, 3 of whom had already left for school. Only 11-year-old Josephine and 9-year-old Joseph Jr. remained. It was a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning, but someone had been watching the Otero house. The killer had meticulously studied their routines. He knew exactly who was inside and when the older children would leave. Before approaching the front door, the intruder moved to the back of the house and cut the telephone wires. This was a calculated, professional move. He wanted total control. He broke into the home through the back door, carrying a specialized kit. He didn't come to rob the Oteros. He didn't come in a fit of rage. He came equipped with nylon rope, cords, and a chilling, premeditated plan. When he confronted the family, he pulled the gun and forced them into the bedroom. He claimed he was a criminal on the run, desperate for money and a car. He promised them that if they cooperated and allowed themselves to be tied up, he wouldn't hurt them. It was a lie. Once the entire family was bound, the true nightmare began. The intruder systematically strangled Joseph, Julie, Josephine, and young Joseph Jr. The methodology was cold and precise. He took his time, relishing the fear and the absolute control he held over his victims. He wasn't rushing to escape. He stayed in the house, moving from room to room. When he finally left, he took a few small items, a watch, a radio, but left the cash and valuables untouched. This was the first clear sign for investigators that the motive was not financial. Later that afternoon, the 3 older Otero children returned home from school. They found the front door unlocked. As they walked inside, the silence was deafening. No television playing, no parents greeting them. Charlou, the eldest son, walked toward the bedrooms and stumbled upon a scene of unimaginable horror. He ran out of the house screaming for help, alerting a neighbor who immediately called the police. When the Wichita police detectives arrived, seasoned veterans who had seen their fair share of crime, they were visibly shaken. The brutality, the organization, and the complete lack of an obvious motive left them baffled. The crime scene was a puzzle missing its most vital pieces. There were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry at the front, just a terrifying reality that someone had walked into a random home and wiped out a family. Panic gripped the city of Wichita immediately. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts, alarm systems, and window locks within hours. Gun sales skyrocketed. People stopped trusting strangers. Neighbors began looking at each other with suspicion. The police worked around the clock, interviewing hundreds of people, chasing down every possible lead. But the killer had vanished like a ghost. But the monster wasn't finished. Only 3 months later, in April 1974, he struck again. Catherine Bright, a 21-year-old woman, returned to her home with her brother, Kevin. The killer was already inside, waiting in the shadows. He ambushed them with a gun, demanding money and attempting to tie them up using the same exact lies he had told the Otero. But Kevin Bright fought back. A violent struggle ensued. Kevin was shot in the face, but miraculously, he survived and managed to escape. Tragically, he couldn't save his sister. Catherine was fatally stabbed. Kevin's survival was a major breakthrough for the police. For the first time, they had a witness. Kevin described the attacker as an average-looking white male of medium build, with a mustache and cold, dead eyes. He was wearing a dark jacket and a knit cap. Police sketch artists worked frantically to create a composite drawing of the suspect. The image was broadcast on every local television station and printed in every newspaper. The police hoped that someone, somewhere, would recognize the face, but the description was painfully ordinary. It looked like thousands of men in Kansas. The killer, however, wasn't satisfied with simply committing the crimes. He craved the spotlight. He wanted the fear, the recognition, and the infamy. In October 1974, a young mechanical engineering student at a local college received an anonymous tip to check a specific engineering textbook at the Wichita Public Library. Hidden inside the pages of that book was a letter. The student immediately turned it over to the police, and what the detectives read chilled them to the bone. The letter was written in poorly spelled, almost poetic language. The author claimed full responsibility for the Otero family murders. To prove he wasn't just a crank seeking attention, he included highly specific details about the crime scene details that had been strictly withheld from the public. He knew exactly how the knots were tied. He knew exactly what positions the bodies were left in. He knew what items were taken from the house. There was no doubt. The author of the letter was the killer. But it was the ending of the letter that would permanently scar the history of American true crime. The killer didn't want to be a nameless phantom. He wanted a brand. He wrote a chilling postscript, laying out his personal signature. He told the police, "The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them." BTK. With that letter, the BTK Strangler was born. The local newspapers eventually published the acronym, and the terror in Wichita reached a boiling point. The city realized they weren't just dealing with a murderer. They were dealing with a highly intelligent, sadistic serial killer who was taunting the police and actively seeking media attention. Following the library letter, BTK went silent for a while. The police maintained a massive task force, but without DNA technology, cell phone tracking, or modern surveillance cameras, they were hunting a needle in a haystack. The behavioral science experts from the FBI theorized that the killer was a loner, someone who couldn't maintain normal relationships, someone who lived on the fringes of society. They were dead wrong. BTK was a chameleon. He was sitting in church pews on Sunday mornings. He was attending neighborhood barbecues. He was walking in the same streets as the detectives hunting him, reading the same newspapers, and watching the same news reports. He fed on the fear he had created, and as the years rolled on, he was carefully planning his next move, preparing to strike again. When the city 70s gave way to the 1980s, the chilling shadow of BTK seemed to fade. Years passed without a single letter, phone call, or murder attributed to the notorious serial killer. The city of Wichita slowly began to exhale. The local police, along with the FBI, theorized that BTK was either locked up in a federal prison, committed to a mental institution, or dead. They assumed the nightmare was finally over. But Dennis Rader was very much alive. He had simply retreated into his meticulously crafted double life, playing the role of a devoted family man while his dark fantasies festered in silence. Then, in 1985, after an agonizingly long dormant period, the urge to kill became too powerful to suppress. The monster broke his silence. His victimology shifted. Instead of targeting young women, he focused on a 53-year-old woman named Maureen Hedge, who lived on his own street. Rader broke into her home, strangled her, and then did something entirely new and profoundly disturbing. He didn't just leave her body at the crime scene. He transported her corpse to his own church, Christ Lutheran Church, where he was a respected leader. Under the cover of darkness, he posed her body in degrading positions inside the church, taking photographs to keep as morbid trophies, before finally dumping her remains in a ditch miles away. BTK was back, more brazen and depraved than ever before. A year later, in September 1986, Rader targeted 28-year-old Vicky. He spotted the young mother walking towards her house and forced his way inside. Her husband returned home for lunch only to find their 2-year-old son sitting alone in the living room, crying. When he walked into the bedroom, he found his wife's lifeless body. Because Rader had left so little evidence, the police initially suspected Vicky's husband. For years, an innocent man lived under the heavy cloud of suspicion, while the true killer continued to attend Sunday services and Boy Scout meetings, completely undetected. Rader's final known murder occurred in January 1991. He slipped away from a Boy Scout camping trip, using the excursion as a perfect alibi, broke into the home of 62-year-old Dolores Davis. He bound her, tortured her, and strangled her with her own pantyhose. He later returned to the location where he dumped her body, wearing a feminine mask, simply to take Polaroid photographs. It was a terrifying display of his complete detachment from human empathy. After the murder of Dolores Davis, BTK vanished again. This time, the silence lasted for 13 long years. Rader sank back into his facade, working as a local compliance officer, handing out citations for overgrown lawns and unleashed dogs, exercising petty authority over his neighbors while harboring the darkest secret in American history. For over a decade, he watched his children grow, celebrated holidays, and lived a painfully ordinary life. The ghost of BTK was firmly locked away. But a serial killer's ego is a fragile, dangerous thing. In 2004, the 30th anniversary of the Otero family murders approached. A local Wichita newspaper published a feature article about the unsolved case, mentioning that a book titled Nightmare in Wichita was being written. When Rader read this, his narcissism exploded. He could not stand the thought of someone else telling his story. He couldn't bear the idea of fading into obscurity while true crime authors profited from his work. He decided it was time to remind the world exactly who he was. In March 2004, the Wichita Eagle newspaper received a letter containing photographs of the Vicky Wiggerle crime scene and a copy of her driver's license. The message was clear. BTK was alive, and he was back. The city was instantly plunged back into the terrifying paranoia of the 1970s. This began a bizarre, high-stakes game of cat and mouse between Rader and the police. He began leaving packages around the city. He left a cereal box in a Home Depot parking lot. He sent cryptic word puzzles. He communicated with the authorities through classified ads in the local paper. He was intoxicated by the media frenzy, absolutely convinced that he was infinitely smarter than the detectives hunting him. But his arrogance was blinding him. Technology had drastically evolved since his first murders in 1974, and Rader was hopelessly out of touch. In one of his communications, Rader asked the police a seemingly innocent question. He wanted to know if a floppy disk could be traced back to a specific computer. He asked them to be honest. The police, realizing they had a golden opportunity, placed a coded classified ad in the newspaper that read, "Rex, it will be okay." It was a deliberate, brilliant lie. Believing he had outsmarted the authorities, Rader sent a purple floppy disk to a local Fox television station in February 2005. The station immediately handed it over to the police. Inside the Wichita Police Department, a computer expert inserted the disk into a laptop. A crowd of nervous detectives gathered behind him, holding their breath. The expert didn't just look at the files Rader wanted them to see. He dug into the disk's hidden metadata. Deep within the code of a deleted Microsoft Word document, two pieces of information illuminated the screen. The document was registered to a user named Dennis, and it was linked to the Christ Lutheran Church. In that single breathtaking moment, the impenetrable mask of BTK cracked wide open. The ghost, the name Dennis, and its association with the Christ Lutheran Church ignited the final phase of the investigation. Detectives pulled up the church's website. Staring back at them was the ordinary face of the congregation president, Dennis Rader. It sent chills down the spines of hardened investigators. The ghost they hunted for 30 years wasn't a drifter or an outcast. He was the guy next door, a man who parked his car, mowed his lawn, and attended city council meetings. Police cross-referenced Rader's address in Park City, Kansas. The vehicle from the Home Depot security camera was a black Jeep Cherokee. A black Jeep Cherokee was in Dennis Rader's driveway. The puzzle pieces were locking into place, but definitive proof was needed. They needed forensic evidence that would hold up in court. They needed his DNA. Securing a DNA sample without alerting him was delicate. Police couldn't simply knock on his door with a warrant. If he suspected, he might destroy evidence, flee, or, worse, strike again. Instead, they took a strategic route. They obtained a subpoena for a medical clinic at Kansas State University, where Rader's daughter, Carrie, had been a student. They acquired a tissue sample from a routine pap smear. Lab technicians worked furiously to extract her DNA profile and compare it to semen from BTK crime scenes. The results were undeniable. The familial match was a near-perfect statistical certainty. The BTK killer was Carrie Rader's father. On the freezing afternoon of February 25, 2005, a massive convoy of law enforcement descended upon Park City. As Dennis Rader drove toward his home, unmarked police vehicles swarmed him, boxing him in on all sides. Officers with guns drawn pulled him from the driver's seat. 31 years after the Otero murders, BTK's reign was over. When an officer asked Rader if he knew why he was arrested, he simply sighed and replied, "Oh, I have suspicions." The interrogation that followed was one of the most chilling in FBI history. Rader didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't invoke his right to remain silent. Instead, over 34 hours, he confessed to everything. But he didn't confess with remorse or guilt. He confessed with the arrogance of a professor giving a lecture. He calmly detailed every murder, describing bindings, torture, and killing with emotional detachment, like discussing a grocery list. He seemed offended when detectives asked about the floppy disk, feeling betrayed. "You lied to me?" he whined. "How come you lied to me?" The utter lack of self-awareness was staggering. He was a serial killer upset that the police had been On March 1, 2005, Rader was officially charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder. Kansas braced for a long, traumatic trial. But in a surprising turn, Rader decided to plead guilty. He didn't want a long legal battle. He wanted to control the narrative one last time. During his sentencing hearing in June 2005, the world saw the true monster behind the mask. Standing in a crowded courtroom, Rader recounted his crimes for the judge. Using bizarre, sterile terminology, he referred to his victims as projects. He described his murderous impulses as hits. He talked about hanging young Josephine Otero, as if explaining a plumbing repair. The victims' families sat weeping, forced to listen to this man discuss their loved ones like disposable objects. He showed absolutely zero remorse. He even smirked, relishing the attention and being the focal point of a massive news event. Dennis Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive lifetimes, a minimum of 175 years to serve. He was transported to the El Dorado Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison, placed in solitary confinement. He is permitted out of his cell for only 1 hour a day to exercise in a wire cage. He is forbidden from watching television, listening to the radio, or receiving any news from the outside world. He is completely isolated from the attention and notoriety he so desperately craved. For 3 decades, he believed he was untouchable. He believed he was an evil genius, a god. But in the end, it wasn't brilliant police work or a dramatic shootout that brought him down. It was his own colossal vanity and a profound ignorance of modern technology. Dennis Rader built the legend of BTK, but he also provided the weapon that destroyed it. He is a pathetic, aging man locked in a concrete box, slowly fading from memory, leaving behind only the scars on the city he terrorized and the devastating legacy of the 10 lives he stole.